But I want to say you what we should discuss. If we have problem, we should speak about this aloud, and we should listen each other. Yes, it is important to hear problem and decide, find a way from this problem. Yes, it is very important between people, between people and governments, between countries, everywhere. We should listen each other.
That pressure may keep increasing and widening, for example, on more Chinese companies.
Hello everyone, hello. My name is Alex and I'm studying English. And today we will watch another video. And this video will be about USA and China. Yes, this video are named China and USA, Geopolitics of the New Cold War. Yes, and you can support me. You can leave a like and subscribe to me. I appreciate it very much. And at first I want to say what I'm against war. Here we can see words. Cold War. I'm against war. Doesn't mean Cold War, warm war. For me it doesn't matter. I'm for peace. Yes, and it is my opinion, of course. Yes, let's go. Let's watch.
Looming threat of the current economic war between US and China growing into a Cold War, this video will explore just that. What would a new Cold War look like? With globalization splitting into two power influence spheres, what roster of allies could each side count on? What would happen if the US political might turns against China? Who would rush ahead in technology? And would there be a winner? Do you know about the Great China Firewall? It's already sort of an iron curtain, one that China raised itself, so Chinese users can't access a lot of Western websites. But with NordVPN, users can bypass that firewall when in China.
I'm listening very carefully, but it is about ad. Of course, thank you. I don't remember your channel. Thank you very much. I will leave a link from this video, and thank you for your work, because I think it will be useful for me to watch.
Guarantee.
Yes, let's go.
But let us get back to the Cold War. 1946 to 1991. Almost half a century of fear. A period where most of the world worried if tens of millions would again lose lives in yet another world war. A period in which nuclear threats proliferated and the world thought hundreds of millions might perish in atomic blasts. And it all started between allies. Because of lack of understanding, because of desire for control, and because of fear. Before it was US and the Soviet Union.
Yes, if you fear, you're controlled. If you have fear, yes, you are controlled by somebody. Yes, I think it is important to know.
Now, decades later, the history may be repeating itself. Are we witnessing the start of a Cold War 2.0? The US administrations before Trump's one saw China as an economic partner, and its economic policies as something that, while they don't agree with them, are mostly Chinese internal matter. Current US administration has, for the first time in almost 30 years, seriously changed its tune on China. The rhetoric from the US in the last few years has been more and more warlike. China has always been a more authoritarian state. While part capitalist, its economy is largely state-controlled. It was technologically behind the West by quite some margin. It has been spying on other countries. It has been conducting land reclamation in South China Sea at islands and rocks that were already a subject of conflicting territorial claims by several neighborhood countries. It appears all that was acceptable to previous US administrations, as they believed China would not come close to US political and economic influence. And all the things that were previously tacitly overlooked, while US companies profited from a not-so-powerful China, are now, when China is getting more powerful, showcased as problematic. Even now, the conflict can hardly be called just a trade war. It's more and more evident we are witnessing pressure on state level through economic and political means.
sometimes I think a trade war it is better than a real war. Sometimes I think so, but it's not true, of course. It is all bad thing, but it is, of course, it is better maybe than a real war. But I want to say you what we should discuss. If we have problem, we should speak about this aloud, and we should listen each other. Yes, it is important to hear problem and decide, find a way from this problem. Yes, it is very important between people, between people and governments, between countries, everywhere. We should listen each other.
That pressure may keep increasing and widening, for example, on more Chinese companies. And Chinese may very well retaliate on US companies, withhold various resources and so on. US may then feel compelled to pressure its allies even more, to pick between China and US. And before you know it, the world may indeed be splitting into two political blocs, which do little trading and cooperation between themselves. Sounds familiar? That is exactly what happened in the first Cold War between Soviet Union and US and its allies. After World War II ended, US was afraid of Soviet influence in Europe, as Soviets had liberated a large chunk of Europe. Their military remained in those countries, and their political influence was considerable, making them almost puppet states. On the other hand, Soviet Union was afraid of evident US economic might, of its political influence that suddenly appeared in Western Europe, as most of Europe was deep in debt to the US as it helped rebuild it, and of US nuclear weapons, a powerful weapon which Soviets lacked at the time. So instead of cooperation, fear prevailed. Iron Curtain was raised, little to no trading was done. Technology sharing was carefully prevented, as US side tried and eventually succeeded in outstacking the Soviet Union, and an arms race flourished. All of that may very well happen again in a new Cold War. Still, there are considerable differences between then and now. In the original Cold War, it was the US and its allies that were economically way ahead of the Eastern Bloc. And as the decades passed, that gap in economy only increased, especially with Japan and Europe being rebuilt. Soviet Union was much smaller and weaker than US economically, and its ally countries, like Comecon.
And here we can see what Soviet Union had 2.7 trillion and USA 5.2 trillion. Oh my gosh, dollars.
Countries were a much smaller addition than US allies were to US economy. Furthermore, the neutral countries which dealt with both sides, even
rest of the world, $7 trillion. Oh my gosh, but USA had 5.2 trillion.
Even when all combined, had fairly small and poor economies. They had little to no added value to add in trade, and the technology development in those countries was next to nothing compared to the two big blocs. Today the situation is different. Europe is not an unified front rooting for the US. The EU is a loosely tied union of countries.
And it is of course Switzerland, yes? It's Switzerland.
While US has been pressuring various countries against cooperating with Chinese companies, for example on 5G data networks and on infrastructure
Yes, and I've heard of course about 5G, yes. What Huawei have problems, have sanctions from USA, yes. And it is was a very popular news, and now of course I think it is very popular news about Huawei.
Projects like the Chinese Road and Belt Initiative, most of European countries have not sided with the US. Italy and Greece have took part in the Road and Belt Initiative, and majority of European countries have allowed Huawei parts in their 5G networks. The US administration is perhaps not as focused as it could be, as it has at times started frictions between themselves and EU, when it comes to various tariffs and pressuring EU firms and organizations not to trade with Iran. All that may influence European countries if a moment comes where US forces them to choose between itself and China. Some, like the UK, have led the way of US allies and may be predicted as supporting US. But the likes of Germany, France and others may very well decide it's better to play both sides and remain neutral, trading and...
I like neutral status. I like this very much, and I think what Russia should be neutral. It's my opinion. I'm not government. I'm not politician, but I love neutral status. I want to be neutral. How neutral is Switzerland? Yes, yes. Because I don't like war. I never like this, and I'm against war. All my life I will speak about what war. It is not exit. Yes, and we should listen each other. Yes.
Inevitably exchanging technology through trade with both sides. Middle East has traditionally played both sides and has even recently dealt economically with both. It's unlikely they would pick a side either. Same can be said of most of Latin America, with the probable exception of Mexico, which is too dependent on US economically not to support it in geopolitics as well. Chinese traditional allies such as Pakistan and Russia would too likely trade both sides, unless US manages to block international trade with them as well. Though in such countries where US has been imposing various sanctions, perhaps even including Turkey, trade with China might be preferred than trade with US allies. Ultimately, very few countries would profit from picking a side, and thus most countries would remain neutral and wait out to see who is winning the Cold War. As US and China are already number one and number two country when it comes to economy and influence, there would be little change for them, regardless of who wins the trade war. Risking their position by picking a side might prove to be too dangerous and wouldn't bring a long-term gain. Simply cutting China off the global trade map is not realistic. The US is already trying to go down another route, cutting off the technology access. The Huawei ban has been most politicized, but there are many other firms that have been banned as well.
Banned from cooperating with US companies. It is Huawei. Yes, I heard about this. I don't know this company, Fujian Jinhua. No, and about this company I didn't hear too. And what?
Mostly dealing in
1 moment. 143 Chinese companies banned in total. Oh my gosh.
computer hardware. Access of Chinese students and Chinese firms in general to various technology within the US is rapidly diminishing, as cooperation between companies and universities is being banned. Indeed, the Soviet lag in computer technology was one of the big factors why Soviet Union was behind in the first place. The rapid economic development of the West was in part due to information technology helping in the production process. But banning Chinese companies just in US isn't enough. US is trying to get other countries to stop cooperating with China in select areas. How successful that will be remains to be seen. So far, the Chinese have been catching up in various areas quite rapidly, especially in telecommunications, artificial intelligence, automation, nuclear reactors and other power generation, rocketry, etc. Indeed, the research and development investments have been rising rapidly. But the technology gap, if it persists, may influence not just the economy, which is a multi-decade process, but ability to wage war. And technological edge in war has oftentimes been the decisive factor, one US probably doesn't want to lose. Right now, US is still ahead technologically in some areas, though in others the gap has shrunk quite a bit. The table shown portrays Binkov's estimates of how much Chinese military technology, now being fielded, lags behind US technology being fielded. But evaluating those tech gaps is tricky. A jet engine that is 20 years behind today's best is going to yield 15% less thrust, all other things being equal. Had one measured 20 years from 1945, the difference would have been huge. Similar incremental improvements may be used for most other technologies. When it comes to geopolitics, US could in theory profit more with a hot war than a cold one. A hot war may escalate in any which way. If China goes after Taiwan or Japan in an effort to deny those to US, for example, other world countries may turn against it. Countries that would have otherwise be content to stay neutral when it comes to pure economics. Similarly, if Russia gets involved and aids China, chances that EU countries get in.
I don't want this. I like all countries in this world, but I'm against war. I said this before, and of course I'm against this situation. Russia must be neutral, but we should be prepared, but neutral at first, of course, because Come on, we have own problems. Go fighting with yourself if you want this, but without me.
Involved and aid US against the two rise sharply.
Yes, and I speak my opinion, of course. I don't know what to think about other people. Russia, it is a big country, and all people have own opinion, yes. And if you ask another Russian man, he said your opinion, yes. Okay.
Of course, a shooting war is not something any sane person wants. In pure game theory, US would be better off seeking war, especially now when its economic and technological advantage over China is still noticeable. In the real world, one doesn't just go to war. Usually some years or decades of administration changes, policy changes and culture clashes are needed to deteriorate the situation, so it leads to an arms race and buildup of forces near one another. In such volatile conditions, misunderstandings and fear may spark a conflict. Unfortunately, we're seeing those changes happening. Now all that is left is indeed an arms race and force buildups. US goals are certainly to contain China, not just economically, technologically and politically, but also geographically. In that regard, US position is already very potent, as it benefits from Cold War alliances and bases. US has forces deployed in permanent bases in South Korea and Japan, as well as access to British and Australian bases, and its own territory, via certain islands in the Pacific. Depending on the political situation in case of an escalating Cold War, US might enlist a lot of countries in its alliance against China. Though said alliance might as well lack some of those countries if Chinese political influence rises or some of those countries decides the dangers of being dragged into a war are greater than the benefit of being in the US alliance. Chinese goals are certainly breaking out of that chain of US bases and its containment. China has little means of reaching the open Pacific today undetected, and its air force is mostly tied to its mainland, without faraway power projection. Chinese relations with Vietnam aren't that good, so it's likely Vietnam would remain neutral in any geopolitical power struggle. Similar situation may apply to Malaysia and Indonesia. Cambodia and Myanmar are closer to China, but short of...
Yes, I've heard about Myanmar. Yes, Myanmar. Yes, this country now have difficult situation inside. Yes, and I think that now they don't think about other countries. They think about own problems. Yes, I think so.
A hot war, it's still hard to imagine them picking sides and providing bases to China. Philippines, though recently leaning towards China, is still not likely to incur the US wrath by choosing sides. North Korea is a wild card, but it's plausible China would not risk alienating South Korea by cozying up to the north and losing more than gaining in the process. Similar issue was already pointed out concerning Russia. Dragging Russia into the equation might alienate Europe, feeling threatened by Russia. But all those are today's relationships. As the Cold War may last for decades, who's to say how the allegiances might shift if Chinese economic and thus political influence keeps rising. But perhaps US doesn't need to hold off China at a gunpoint. Sure, it may feel threatened, but China may not overshadow it. Economic crisis can happen as Chinese population is destined to start falling in coming decades, and age distribution is going to put a great burden on the remaining working population. Also, Chinese actions against freedom of religion and practicing other culture for its populace, as well as telling its people what it can and can't do, may alienate it culturally from other countries, making it a bit harder to do business with it. The future is not set. It's hard to predict. But US, as the currently most powerful nation in the world, one that has been enjoying the benefits of that position for almost a century now, is not likely to quietly step down. As we are seeing, it's fighting off the most likely country to supersede it. And unless the calmer heads prevail, the economic and political struggle may turn this Cold War in the making into something more dangerous. No one wants to live in decades of fear from a new world war or even nuclear Armageddon. One Cold War was enough. Perhaps this new one can still be prevented. Thanks for watching. Military and economic aspects of this rising Cold War will be covered in a near future video, so watch out for that.
Yes, for me...
Also, if you found this video
yes, I get it. For me it was really interesting, and I hope what for you it was really interesting too. I like to watch video about politics and geopolitics because it is interesting. Come on. And yes, I liked this video too. And of course, what I'm speaking here, it is only my opinion. Yes, and I know what I don't know a lot of things about this world. I don't know a lot of stuff. I'm uneducated man, I think so. I don't know a lot of things, and of course I'm trying to understand this with English. Yes, it is my challenge to understand in English because I'm studying English, and it is really interesting. Yes, and yes, thank you for watching with me this video. Thank you for supporting me, and yes, I'm for peace and only peace. Yes, and of course, see you next time.